Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Every month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. As the numbers now confirm, most middle and low-wage workers who voted in the 2024 presidential election voted for Donald Trump. Two-thirds of voters without a college degree voted the same way. As one polling expert put it, in 2024, paycheck-to-paycheck voters handed the White House to Trump. As for why low-wage workers, once a core Democratic constituency, voted Republican last year, many on the left blame the Democratic Party, claiming it has, in the words of independent Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, abandoned working-class people. Sanders says it's no surprise, then, that, in his words, the working class abandoned them. Or is this election outcome simply part of a global trend towards populism, ushering in a wave of right-wing candidates who've pushed aside mainstream parties and ideologies all across the world? Are we seeing new voting trends due to shifts in demographics or the migrant and refugee crisis? What about organized labor's role in all of this? And as the Trump administration's actions take effect, are entirely new class formations in the works? To answer these questions and more, we are joined by two leading political scholars. John Mollenkopf is a distinguished professor at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he teaches political science and sociology and directs its Center for Urban Research. He's also authored and edited more than a dozen books, including Place Matters, Metropolitics for the 21st Century. And we're joined by Robin D.G. Kelley, distinguished professor of history at UCLA. Robin studies social movements. He's the author of many books, including Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination, and he's joining us from California. John, Robin, thank you so much for joining me here on CityWorks. Let me be clear, I have a horrible cold, but I am good to go, and I feel better already having the two of you here. We're going to spend a little time on post-mortem of that November election, which already seems a very long time ago. But just to start, some of the sort of conventional wisdoms that have been articulated about this election is that there was a shift to the right, that working class voters especially shifted to the right, that Democrats lost their working class base. Robin, you want to take a first whack at it? What's true, what's false, what's confusing?
Sure, the Democrats shifted to the right. In terms of running that campaign, they were trying their best to prove that they have Republican support, that they're across the board. I do think two things are important. One, a lot of people sat out this election, and I think John probably knows more about in terms of demographics. Two, if you break down the working class by like race, gender, Black working women didn't abandon the Democratic Party. In fact, almost to their detriment. But they didn't. They were very loyal. Black men did not abandon in other words, there wasn't a big shift to Trump, despite what some of the media says. In the end, though, I do think that the Democrats' shift to the right, which they always do, ends up, and I think Bernie Sanders is right to a certain degree, that this is a way of leaving the working class behind. And it's not that Trump represents, in terms of his rhetoric, the kind of corporate Project 2025 types. That's not what he was saying on the campaign trail. It was xenophobia and racism, the thing that often works in terms of generating just enough working class voters to support him.
John, what would you add to that in terms of metro politics? New York City, where we're sitting, is said to have shifted to the right, did it?
Well, I think it's misleading to talk about a shift to the right. That implies people who were Democrats changed their minds and voted like Republicans or shifted their values. Nationally, about a third of the election is explained by the fact that Trump mobilized his base and got more votes from that base in 24 than he did in 20. But two-thirds nationally, and in big cities like LA and New York City, 4/5 of the difference was accounted for by the Democratic base not showing up. And I think both things, mainly the press coverage has been about how Trump effectively mobilized his base, and I think you have to give his campaign credit. It was in my view, a fairly vile campaign, but it was very effective. That ad about, Kamala is for they, them, and we're for you, just, boils my blood, but it worked. On the other hand, the core Democratic constituencies, particularly from black and brown neighborhoods, didn't turn out, didn't show up. 4/5 of the shift in New York City was accounted for by lower Democratic vote in areas that are normally quite Democratic. And particularly in Latino and Asian immigrant neighborhoods, you saw that decline of support.
What about the anti-war vote?
I don't think the anti-war vote played a very big role in it. The groups that were very keen about stopping Israel from demolishing Gaza and killing so many people, probably, I don't know that we have good polling on that, but I think a lot of them ended up voting, either not voting or voting for Biden, because they had a pretty clear understanding of where Trump stood on these matters.
Anything you would add to that, Robin?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the not voting is a factor. In other words, a lot of people sat out this because they just could not vote for Biden because of the war. My take on this really is that, we lost an opportunity, I think, to explain to people what was lost as a result of the war on Gaza, how much money was spent that could have gone to other social needs, raising wages, expanding the social safety net. I mean, that was a discussion that we're trying to have now, but we need to have as well. But I do agree with John. Those who try to blame especially the Arab American and the pro-Palestinian voters for somehow derailing this is mistaken.
Part of it was the structural situation, and in your opening you listed a bunch of factors that could have led to this, and I sort of wanted to say yes to all of them. All of them, yeah. Most of them played a role. But part of it was, I think, the fault of the Harris campaign, in that top of people's list was cost of living, kitchen table issues. And the Harris campaign did not really directly address those. Free trade, globalization, deindustrialization, the China job shock, all of that has materially worsened the lives of small town white America. There's a couple of parts of the world where I do get to small towns that I've seen in decline since the 50s that used to be, New England mill towns with unionized workforces and good wages. And first the jobs moved to the south to non-union settings, and then they were completely offshored. And more recently, a lot of, well-paid unionized industrial work has been offshored or to China in particular. So when Trump talks about China as an enemy and the U.S. getting ripped off and all of that, I think it resonates with people who've seen their factories disappear.
I mean, it is easy. It is like fish in a barrel to mobilize resentment in this moment of as you say, deindustrialization, despair, disgruntlement, dislocation, declining wages, anxiety. I want to talk about how it's happened and what we can make of it now, because what I see is both parties talking about identity politics, and then saying, well, let's not talk about it anymore in order to achieve whatever. This seems to me a disaster because we have to talk, and you've made a very clear distinction, Robin, that it's not about identity, it's about ideology. We're talking about structures of power. So can you tweak the analysis for us?
Sure. I mean, if you go back to the anti-DEIA executive orders,
diversity, equity, inclusion, access.
Right,
yep.
Diversity, equity, and access. What the Trump administration in Project 2025, because this is in their documents, what they're doing essentially is not about DEIA at all. It's about rendering anti-racism illegal.
Right.
And with that, rendering trans rights illegal, rendering, making ableism, right, legal, making racism legal. Because fundamentally, that's what it's about. So ultimately, this all comes back down to class. The attack on DEI is not about necessarily corporate kowtowing to Spring 2020. It is about making sure, not just about dividing working class either, that's part of it, but making sure that the state could kind of eliminate the social wage, regulatory power of the state to solve problems. That is, to have a social safety net, to deal with social needs. By saying that social needs are somehow black and brown and undocumented, whether or not they are, is a way of, again, using this idea that the real victims are white men, and all these other people have been the racists, the black people have been the racists, undocumented people are racist, that ableism, right? The politics of ableism, which is a driver of all this, is sort of saying that, we're not going to even allow anyone even at the table, despite their values, even the idea of merit-based.
Yeah.
Merit-based has nothing to do with this, because obviously if you look at Trump's picks for, that's not about merit at all.
We're going to pick that up when we come back on the other side, and we're going to go further to talk about this question of how do we move from here. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching CityWorks. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CityWorks. We're talking with political scholars John Mollenkopf and Robin D.G. Kelley. John, we've been talking about how racism and misogyny are weaponized by different parties for different reasons and suppressed for similar reasons, and how this played out in the last election. And I don't think Robin quite said this, but I bet he would have. We have pressures again from Democrats and some on the left to say, let's not center race in this. Now we have an opportunity to, mobilize federal workers without talking about who they are.
I don't think the Democratic Party can ever give up on saying we represent black people, we represent Latino people, we represent marginal people who have been screwed by the system. But the problem is that then the Democratic Party is an alliance, a coalition between well-educated professional people, mainly white, but of all races, and the minority working classes. And that's inherently hard to synthesize, to hold together, whereas the Republican coalition are basically the angry white middle class.
I mean,
and
New York
much
is a
more
great,
cohesive and
New
clear.
York is a great example of this, where you have Democratic voters who are liberal elites. Really, they actually are, because other people can't afford to live here.
Correct. And in New York City politics and national politics, when the WFP voters, the Bernie Sanders voters, who are primarily white and well-educated in the city, line up with working class African Americans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, et cetera, they're a very clear majority of the electorate, and they can block the right from getting anywhere. But racial politics divides that coalition, and class politics, and there's all kinds of resentments. Who's going to be up? Who's going to be down? How does the pie get sliced up in that coalition? And it's not an easy one to fuse together.
Yeah. So let's come to this moment. I mean, you have tens of thousands, or maybe by the time people are watching this show, hundreds of thousands of people laid off. Federal workers, first and foremost, but not only. And all the consequential layoffs that will accompany the mass layoffs of federal workers have yet to be kind of totaled. You have, declining incomes. People may be on unemployment, but they've got declining incomes, declining purchasing power. I mean, the implications of the tariff wars. I mean, we have a lot that is destabilizing a lot of people. What are the possibilities in this moment? And I haven't even talked about immigration raids and campus-based raids. I mean, the condition of women trying to get health care, trans people trying to get health care. It does seem to me in a moment right now, we haven't dealt with our old class formations and our understanding thereof, but we could have some new ones in this moment, but not, it seems to me, if we don't grapple with some of the same things we've been failing to grapple with up to now. So John, where do you see the possibilities?
Well, I'm actually pretty optimistic because I think Trump is behaving in a very irrational, self-defeating, dysfunctional way. He's punishing the constituencies that elected him to make their lives better. Prices are going to go up. Unemployment is going to go up. The tariff war is just crackpot. And this will echo through the economy. It's going to upset a lot of powerful constituencies that so far have said, well, this guy's a bully. If he doesn't notice us and we're just quiet, maybe he'll pass us by and go to somebody else. But he's hurting enough people that they're going to get together and react to him. And I'm including important, what he's done just in the last period about Columbia University and sending them a letter saying they have to put the Middle East department into receivership for 5 years if they want to, be on his good side. Columbia can't do that, and Columbia, represents a bunch of important constituencies. They're not powerless. They're not marginal people who just have to cower in front of. And if he does that to enough places, they're going to organize against him. And I think how it'll show up is in certainly the 2026 congressional elections. If it goes as the historical patterns indicate it might well, and he loses, substantially in the House, he's basically, his ability to do things is done.
Well, I want to believe.
So I think one of the reasons that he's behaving in such an authoritarian way is I think he's pretty clear about the fact that he has maybe less than 2 years to get done whatever he thinks that he has to get done for his crazy purposes.
All right, Robin. So what do you think? Possibilities and perils of this moment.
Okay, I actually share some optimism. It's a very different approach. Number one, I think that the reason why the Project 2025 people are working so fast is because labor came strong. In other words, during the Biden years, much of the gains that labor made was through strikes. And UAW built a movement that is significant. We see, low-wage workers organized. I'm not saying that they won everything, but they won quite a bit, number one. Number two, federal workers are pissed. And if you eliminate huge numbers of federal workers, they may be out of a job, but that doesn't mean that they're not able to mobilize to make certain claims. And some of those claims will be in the courts. But the third thing is that I'm not optimistic about Columbia University. I wish. Because one of the arguments I've been making is that university administrations, including my own, have been doing Trump's work for the last year and a half. In other words, they beat down so many student protests and faculty protests that it weakened our movement. And they're doing the same thing now. They've accepted hiring freezes and all this other stuff. So I hope Columbia stands strong. But my friends in the faculty don't think they're going to do that because the administration actually was complicit in the abduction of Mahmoud Khalil.
This is the Palestinian-born student with the green card, graduate student at Columbia, who was detained and actually incarcerated pending deportation. An effort to deport him. It seems, as we're speaking, that he's remaining in detention, but it's going to be very hard to deport him. We don't know where that's going to stand by the time this program airs. John, I'm not seeing pushback exactly. I mean, we're in
No,
New
no,
York,
it's
so we're
gonna
talking
take
about
a while to
Columbia, but we've got
percolate.
universities all across this country that have done pretty much what Robin says in terms of policing their students, policing their faculty, undermining union power on campus, and not really standing up for free speech. And now we have attacks on free speech at the level of journalism, at the level of student protests, at the level of professors, and even at the level of people trying to show up for town hall meetings and getting dragged out by their ear. That's a free speech violation too.
That may be, but I think the politics will rotate more around the fact that he's already, cut the overhead rate to 15% on NIH grants, and he's threatening a list of the 60 most important universities in the country. And if federal funding is dramatically cut to the research enterprise, that's existential for for higher education in the United States. And boards of trustees may be very conservative. They may be glad that the president is tough on people that are occupying the administration building or whatever. But they're not going to, allow their institutions to be demolished by Donald Trump.
So, next steps. One of the questions behind this episode was the question of what does solidarity actually look like? What does power look like in this moment? And as we were speaking, I was recently in Selma, Alabama for the 60th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. And I was reminded that the pressure that the civil rights movement built up at that moment forced LBJ, famously, to pass the Voting Rights Act. When I went back and researched, it wasn't just the Voting Rights Act. We're talking about the creation of the Department of Education. We're talking about immigration reform. We're talking about Medicare, all of Medicaid, healthcare for poor people. All of these gains for working America came because of the pressure built by that movement. And that movement centered white supremacy and race, but it was about more than that. And I'm wondering, could we be moving towards another moment like that, and what would facilitate that versus not? Because let's not forget that was a deadly moment for people. That was incredible use of armed force against rebellion. Things look very bleak, and yet those gains came from it. Robin?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And what's different, of course, is that this is a period of expansion. LBJ was able to wage the Vietnam War at the expense of the war on poverty, at the expense of, and he also expanded the carceral state in that period of time. So two things at once. But it was a liberal regime. And I think that that's required upon all of us to basically stop thinking about our movements in terms of putting aside what gets named identity politics, to focus on the single thing that we call class and recognize that all those things are our class. That the things that were fought for that became the Great Society were not necessarily like about just sort of a kind of narrow understanding of class. They were about the social wage. That is, how do we create a good society? We're dealing with Project 2025 that says we're going to create a society for the rich. Yeah. And we've got to come back and say we need a great society for all people. And we need to not live under an oligarchy and realize that our fight against the right wing is a global one.
John?
Well, I think you're right to go back to the Great Society and that period. Crucial to that victory of all those measures that you mentioned was the fact that Northern Democrats or non-Southern Democrats vastly outnumbered Republicans and Southern Democrats in that Congress by a larger margin than ever before. So there was a political and electoral coalition to support these things. And I think what Republicans have done ever since is to try to attack that and deconstruct it and take it apart and exploit the divisions. But that coalition was dependent on white liberals' support, and eroding white liberalism has also been part of the project of the conservative right in the country since then. So, I think I mean, a lot of what we're seeing at a national level today transpired in cities that were going through racial transition from the late 50s through the 60s and into the 70s. You think of the Louise Day Hicks or the Frank Rizzos and conservative white ethnic politics and a great deal of racial conflict and reaction to racial uprisings and racial mobilizations. And cities like LA and New York City have gotten way beyond that. You know, white voters, white native-born people with white parents make up less than 1 in 5 people that live in New York City. So it's possible to construct a multiracial liberalism in a sort of post-biracial conflict environment. So, and we've gone through that and we've succeeded. We got beyond Rudy Giuliani here. The rest of the country hasn't done that, but I think we're on the, you know, arguably it's possible. We may be on the way.
Well, I'm going to grasp at that straw and leave it there. I want to thank you, John Mollenkopf and Robin D.G. Kelley. Wonderful speaking with you. I hope we get to do it again sometime soon. That is it for CityWorks. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu, and be sure to download the nifty CUNY TV app, where you can watch the show and all of CUNY TV's programming. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for joining us.